He is one of the most important political figures of the 20th century. And even though Fidel Castro's death had been announced prematurely many times before, this time the passing of Cuba's legendary leader was announced by his brother on state television.
Querido pueblo de Cuba.
Dear people of Cuba, it's with profound sadness that I must share this with our people, our friends and the world, that today, November 25th at 10:29 at night 2016, the Commander-in-Chief of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro, died.
He was the revolutionary who managed to be a thorn in America's side for half a century. Fidel Castro was leader of the first communist country in the Western Hemisphere, an iconic figure who became a rarely seen recluse in recent years due to old age and ill health. Castro came to power in 1959 after overthrowing the US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. He embraced the Soviet Union and its leader Nikita Khrushchev. America tried and failed to overthrow Castro at the Bay of Pigs in 1961, but relations sunk to an all-time low with the Cuban Missile Crisis a year later.
Before dismantling, you could see fueling and oxidizer vehicles, 2 launchers, and missile-ready tents.
America obtained evidence the Soviets were setting up nuclear-armed missiles on the Caribbean island.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
America then tried to isolate Cuba through a crippling trade embargo, and over the years, legend has it, the CIA tried to assassinate Castro more than 600 times, even packing his cigars with explosives. When the Soviet Union collapsed, so too did Cuba's subsidies, prompting food queues and a waterborne exodus of Cubans to Florida. Opening up tourism helped the Cuban economy to soldier on, but Castro clamped down on dissenting voices, jailing his opponents and restricting private ownership. His social welfare program and universal education won him popular support. He was revered amongst the left of Latin America and continued to enjoy iconic status until his health began to decline. During a speech at a rally in 2001, Fidel Castro had to be helped off stage. 3 years later, a fall left him with a fractured knee and arm. But after abdominal surgery in 2006, he started the transfer of power to his brother Raul, who took the landmark step in 2014 to appear simultaneously with Barack Obama to announce attempts to normalize relations between the two countries.
But I believe that we can do more to support the Cuban people and promote our values through engagement. After all, these 50 years have shown that isolation has not worked.
The arrival of an American president on Cuban soil would have been unthinkable in 50 years under Castro's iron rule, but it was he who made the seemingly impossible happen in 2016. On the streets of Miami, there has been celebration following the news of Castro's death. Many here are the sons and daughters of the Cuban exiles who fled the oppression of the small Caribbean states. The other side of the story of a man who will be lionized in his death as he was during his life. Castro was both dictator and liberator. Fidel Castro leaves Cuba, albeit a changing country, as a one-party state still in the hands of the Castro family. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Well, as you can see, our diplomatic editor, Dominic Waghorn, joins us in the studio. Dominic, straightforward question. How will he be remembered?
I think first and foremost, as a revolutionary, one American diplomat said that he was everything you want from a revolutionary, everything you expect. I mean, he had this, he was very tall, swashbuckling manner. He was, that trademark look, the cigar, the beard, the combat fatigues, everything you expect from a revolutionary. And he took part in combat. He famously saw off the counter-revolutionary attempt the CIA launched the Bay of Pigs on the top of a tank, firing a submachine gun. So he was everything you'd expect. And that gave him a power and a charisma that allowed Cuba to punch above its weight. An island of 11 million people effectively became a kind of small superpower, trying to foment revolution across Latin America, even sending armies as far afield as Africa. And in terms of his achievements in the revolution, there were many of them. He managed to raise living standards. He helped education standards, healthcare in Cuba, lowering infant mortality. Achieved a lot from turning this country, which was poor and corrupt, into in a much better state. But there are limits to that, and the economy ultimately failed a number of times, not least because of American sanctions and the fact the Soviets withdrew support. And I think the biggest mark against him is the human rights record. There was undoubtedly, right from the beginning, an attitude he had, which was, if you're not with us, you're against us. And anybody who dissented, whether it was political, whether people were gay, whether they were Christian evangelists, they were locked up, they were tortured, detained for years. And I think he will be remembered for that as well, a brutal dictator as well as a liberator.
Undoubtedly, people today are asking, where does Cuba go next? In part because of the death of Fidel Castro, in part because of that rapprochement with Obama, but also because of the chap who's about to enter the White House.
Exactly, and it's a very interesting timing of Fidel Castro's death, because it comes at this kind of crossroads, and we've seen more than 55 years of economic and political sanctions that America imposed on Cuba that allowed Cuba to blame all its problems. The Castro regime could blame all its problems on America. Barack Obama decided these sanctions that have been in place for as long as Barack Obama's been alive just didn't achieve their stated aim. They were counterproductive. They've allowed the Castro regime to be entrenched in its power. So there's been a rapprochement for the Americans, and the Cubans on the other side have opened up diplomatically. Also economically, there's been privatization to a certain extent, a little bit of liberalization politically, but it's still quite a repressive place. It's following the China-Vietnam model. We'll keep control of power, but we will liberalize the economy to try and make the people richer. Now, Donald Trump's objection to Obama's policy is that until that political reform happens, America will not continue the rapprochement. The big question, though, is whether he will actually reverse that process, go back on what his predecessor has done, or whether the pragmatist, the businessman Donald Trump will see the opportunity a Cuban economy offers to America and carry on in the vein of Obama's reforms.
I just want to bring in some words from the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, because as we've seen in the United Kingdom, we are now seeing people in positions of significance from further to the left than perhaps we might have expected. Here's what Mr. Corbyn had to say on the death of Fidel Castro.
What's so impressive about Cuba is the education and the health services, and I think the legacy of Castro will be that, but will also be this enormous figure on the world stage, the one who campaigned against apartheid and the one who brought a different language and a different set of values. Latterly, things have changed a lot in Cuba. There is a greater recognition that economic progress must go hand in hand with improvements in human rights and the rights of free speech.
The left around the world has a bit of an issue with Fidel Castro in the sense that he has been, for so many, the poster boy for their particular brand of politics. But tens of thousands of political enemies locked up, tens of thousands killed, lesbian, gay people under the cosh. I mean, there is a dark side to this reputation.
Very much so. I mean, for him, for them, the appeal is that he's a man who oversaw a brutal regime and inspired others to do the same. Nasty, right-wing, repressive, corrupt regimes. But Jeremy Corbyn there is not acknowledging the fact that Fidel Castro had a prison system that locked up people who disagree with him politically, but also who he didn't like, didn't conform with his narrow view of what Cubans should be. So if they were gay, Christian evangelists had other religious objections to his brand of communism, they were not just locked up, but they were tortured and arbitrarily detained for years, not to mention the many who were executed at the beginning of the revolution as well.
We've been awaiting comment, of course, from the President-elect Donald Trump. It's rather a pithy tweet. Fidel Castro is dead! Exclamation mark. The words from the man who will soon be entering the White House. I wonder whether we might expect a little bit more from him throughout the day. Dominic, for now, though, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.